The mother within, breaking free from the shadow that shapes your soul. She's still inside you, even if she lives oceans away, even if her body rests in the ground, even if you haven't spoken in decades, her presence remains, not just in memory, but in the architecture of your psyche. Shi Heng Yi warned of this force, the one most feared, yet most formative, the mother complex. It is not simply about the woman herself, but about the inner image, the emotional imprint she left behind. An invisible force that shapes your choices, your voice, your relationships, and the very story you believe about yourself. This is what Shi Heng Yi called the shadow mother. Not the nurturing face she showed the world, but the psychic residue of unmet needs, silent expectations, and ancestral pain. And here lies the painful truth. You will never fully heal until you face her, not the outer mother, but the one who still lives within you. For many, this territory is sacred and terrifying. Shi Heng Yi wrote, "Nothing has a stronger influence psychologically on their environment and especially on their children than the unlived life of the parent." When you carry your mother's pain, her shame, her silence, her sorrow, you become entangled in a life that is not your own. You begin to live as her echo, her protector, her extension, and your soul begins to dim. This is not a path of blame. It is a call to return to yourself, to reclaim the parts of you that were never nurtured, to honor the grief your inner child was never allowed to feel, to set down the weight you were never meant to carry. In this exploration, we are not pointing fingers. We are lighting candles in the darkest corners of your psyche, because true freedom does not come from resenting the mother. It comes from consciously facing the mother within. Take a moment now. Feel into your body. Where do you sense resistance as you hear these words? This tension is not random. It's the first whisper of what we'll uncover together. We will journey deep into the forbidden corners of your psyche, beyond heartbreak, beyond the ego, into the alchemical process of death and rebirth that begins the moment you finally decide to let her go. You will see why your healing has been stuck, how the mother wound has shaped your identity, and how Shi Heng Yi's profound teachings offer a path not just to survival, but to sovereignty. The truth is simple, though not easy. You are allowed to leave the role of the child. You are allowed to stop carrying the sorrow that is not yours. You are allowed to rewrite the myth, and it begins with one terrifying act of courage: facing the mother in your mind. Let's begin. The mother archetype in the collective unconscious. In Shi Heng Yi's psychology, the image of the mother is not limited to the woman who gave us life. She occupies a primordial seat in the architecture of the collective unconscious, a timeless, transpersonal image encoded into the very soul of humanity. To Shi Heng Yi, the mother is first and foremost an archetype, a universal psychic pattern, inherited rather than invented, emerging again and again in dreams, myths, and personal relationships. She is not just personal, she is eternal. The mother archetype carries a dual face: the life giver and the life devourer, the nurturer and the smotherer. This is what Shi Heng Yi called the paradox of the Great Mother. It is an image older than civilization, representing both safety and danger, creation and destruction, comfort and engulfment. As I speak, consider for a moment, which face of the mother has dominated your life? The nurturer who empowers, or the one who, perhaps subtly, diminishes your light? This archetype is not bound to the historical identity of your biological mother. It lives beneath it. It shows up in religious icons, nature symbols, mythology, and even in the earth herself. The mother is both the one who feeds you and the one who threatens to consume you. For those carrying unresolved wounds from their mothers, this archetype becomes entangled with personal trauma. Shi Heng Yi warned that when we confuse the personal mother with the archetypal mother, we enter a psychic labyrinth, reenacting childhood pain through adult relationships, yearning for nurturing yet terrified of closeness, seeking approval while fearing rejection. The archetype, when split and unintegrated, produces psychological distortion. In dreams, the mother may appear as a gentle guardian or a monstrous figure that devours. In myth, she is both Demeter and Kali, Mary and Medea. Shi Heng Yi described this ambivalence as the bipolar nature of the mother archetype: good and evil, creator and destroyer, holy and profane. When the psyche clings to one side while repressing the other, we fragment. To idealize the mother is to deny her shadow. To demonize her is to reject her light. Either way, we fall into projection, casting our inner wounds onto partners, mentors, bosses, spiritual teachers, any figure carrying the symbolic weight of the mother. And this is why so many people remain stuck, because true healing of the mother wound cannot occur at the surface level. I invite you now to pause the video and spend just 30 seconds with this question. What qualities of my mother have I most rejected in myself? Write them down. The awareness itself begins the healing. Shi Heng Yi insisted that we must move beyond personal grievances and into symbolic vision. When we view our mother only through the narrow lens of our childhood, her neglect, her rage, her control, we remain trapped in the ego story. But when we see her as a vessel for ancient forces, when we recognize that our pain is not just personal, but archetypal, we open the door to deep transformation. Shi Heng Yi wrote, "The greatest burden a child must bear is the unlived life of the parents. And it is often through the mother that this unlived life is passed down, her shame, her silence, her grief." The mother complex takes root when the mother's emotional reality becomes internalized by the child, not as a memory, but as a mirror. A child who is emotionally neglected may internalize the belief, "I am unworthy of love." A child who is smothered may internalize, "I am not allowed to be separate, to be free." These voices do not vanish with age. They become the inner monologue of the adult, dictating how you see your worth, your body, your voice, your capacity to love, to belong, to thrive. Unless these inner images are made conscious, the individual will unconsciously seek resolution outside. In romantic partners, in career success, in spiritual bypassing. But the root remains untouched. The wound continues to whisper, "You are still not enough." Shi Heng Yi taught that the mother wound is not just a personal tragedy, it is a collective inheritance. It is a psychic pattern passed through generations, encoded like emotional DNA. Mothers unknowingly transmit their own pain, their own repression, their own disconnection from the feminine principle. And the children, unless awakened, carry it forward until one day someone, perhaps you, has the courage to face the mother image within and say, "This story ends with me." To Shi Heng Yi, healing was not about changing the mother. It was about transforming your relationship to the inner mother, that complex web of associations, emotions, memories, and projections living deep within the psyche. And this work is not small, it is sacred. Because until you confront this inner image, the real transformation cannot begin. The mother is also earth. She is nature. She is the unconscious itself. When we are disconnected from the mother within, we are also disconnected from nature, from our bodies, from intuition, from the mystery of the unknown. We fear the dark. We fear feeling. We over-identify with the rational, the masculine, the controlled. And in doing so, we lose the richness of the soul. Can you feel that truth in your own life? Where have you chosen control over surrender, rationality over intuition? These patterns are not random. They reflect your relationship with the mother within. The cost of remaining blind to the archetypal mother is profound. Chronic anxiety, unresolved grief, relational dysfunction, creative blocks, spiritual emptiness, a constant sense of not belonging to yourself. Shi Heng Yi saw this as a psychological epidemic, a generation adrift from its ancestral roots, from the feminine depths, from the great mother who births not only bodies, but souls. So here is the threshold. Can you see your mother not only as the woman who hurt you, but as the doorway into the ancient psychic forces that shaped her? Can you recognize the archetype moving through her and through you? Can you hold her flaws and your pain without collapsing into blame or idolization? This is not about absolution. It is about liberation. Because until you see the mother image clearly, not just as mother but as mirror, you will continue to walk in circles. Healing will remain shallow, insight will not penetrate the unconscious. But when you face the archetypal mother as she is, vast, mysterious, paradoxical, you no longer seek love from her shadow. You return to the root. You begin, finally, to become yourself. The shadow mother and psychological imprisonment. In Shi Heng Yi's psychology, The shadow mother is one of the most feared and misunderstood inner forces. Unlike the nurturing aspect of the maternal archetype, she is not the mother who protects, nourishes, or guides. She is the one who consumes. She appears in dreams, myths, and the quiet despair of adulthood as the force that clings, suffocates, manipulates, and inhibits the growth of the soul. Shi Heng Yi observed that this devouring aspect is not an anomaly, it is an inescapable pole of the archetype itself. The Great Mother births and devours, she creates and she withholds, and when this aspect is not faced consciously, it becomes a psychic prison from which the ego cannot escape. Right now, notice your breathing. Has it changed? Are you holding your breath? Many of us learn to make ourselves smaller, quieter, less visible in response to the devouring mother. Your body remembers what your mind might deny. The shadow mother shows up in mythology as Data refusing to release Persephone, as dragons guarding sacred treasure, as goddesses who swallow their offspring. Psychologically, she emerges when maternal energy overreaches its natural bounds, when love becomes control, when protection becomes possessiveness, when care disguises dependency. In these moments, the child feels not held, but consumed. And yet, because the energy is wrapped in maternal language, I just want what's best for you, the child cannot name the betrayal. The soul collapses inward, silently absorbing the belief. My freedom is abandonment. My autonomy is betrayal. As Shi Heng Yi wrote, this force rarely enters consciousness in obvious ways. Its grip is subtle, hidden beneath layers of conditioning and inherited guilt. In adult life, it may appear as crippling self-doubt, a persistent inner critic that echoes the mother's voice. It may show up as the inability to feel safe when independent, the reflexive fear of disappointing others, or the unconscious attraction to romantic partners who control, diminish, or suffocate, mirroring the emotional terrain of the mother wound. It is the guilt that arises the moment you try to set a boundary, speak your truth, or walk away from dysfunction. The shadow mother whispers, "You are ungrateful, you are bad, you are selfish." This is psychological infantilization, a state Shi Heng Yi warned against, where the ego remains small and dependent, physically adult but emotionally tethered to the mother's expectations. You may move cities, change your name, live across oceans, and still hear her voice in your head before you speak, before you act, before you dare to live. This is not about physical distance, it is about energetic entanglement. The ego remains a child orbiting the mother's gravity, terrified to step out of line. I challenge you, what decision have you been avoiding making? What boundary have you been afraid to set? What truth have you been swallowing? Notice how your body responds to these questions. Tension, tears, and knot in your stomach. This is the shadow mother's grip. Shi Heng Yi once said that the psyche prefers the known hell to the unknown heaven. And the shadow mother is that hell, familiar, predictable, falsely comforting. People stay in toxic dynamics not because they enjoy suffering, but because suffering preserves the psychic bond. Pain becomes loyalty. Self-betrayal becomes love. And until this pattern is made conscious, individuals will continue recreating the same conditions, believing they are choosing freely when in fact they are acting out the myth of the devouring mother. And what is the mother's most powerful tool? Guilt. Not the healthy guilt that corrects moral failure, but a primordial guilt, an inherited irrational fear that to separate is to die. Shi Heng Yi described this as the psychic leash, forged not from logic but from archetypal fear. I am bad if I walk away. I am betraying her if I become myself. This guilt is ancient. It speaks to the terror of exile, the primal fear of losing the container of life itself. And under its weight, many remain frozen, sabotaging joy, suppressing truth, collapsing before every act of self-assertion. But paradoxically, Shi Heng Yi taught that the shadow mother is not just the jailer. She is also the gatekeeper of the soul. She is the dragon that guards the gold, the monster you must face to retrieve your own name. The pain she causes is not meaningless. It is an initiation. In myth, the hero must confront her not to destroy her, but to reclaim what she holds hostage. The right to exist, to feel, to create, to choose. Integration, not annihilation, is the task. To do this, Shi Heng Yi encouraged active imagination, a conscious inner dialogue with the devouring mother within. You visualize her, you speak to her, you express the rage, the sorrow, the betrayal. You let the abandoned child speak, you let her speak. You come face to face not with evil, but with a wounded archetypal force, distorted by generations of fear, shame, and unlived longing. I invite you now to place your hand on your heart. Feel its beating. This rhythm has sustained you through every moment of your life, even when your mother couldn't. Your body has always been fighting for you. Honor that truth for a moment. And when this process is done sincerely, something shifts. The mother loses her grip. The inner child begins to stand. The psyche begins to remember that it belongs to itself. This confrontation is a psychological death and rebirth. The death of the dependent child, the birth of the sovereign adult. Shi Heng Yi warned that this phase is often accompanied by a collapse, depression, emptiness, grief. But this crumbling is sacred. It is the dismantling of inherited illusion. The ego feels naked, but for the first time, it is real. And it is from this darkness that light can return, not borrowed light, but the soul's own fire. So let us be clear, the shadow mother is not your enemy. She is your threshold. She is the terrible teacher, the fierce face of the feminine that demands you awaken. And when you dare to confront her, not to blame her, but to reclaim yourself, you open the door to freedom. You begin to live not as a child trying to please, but as an adult who chooses. You rise not in defiance of the mother, but in honor of what she could never complete. This is not just personal healing, this is ancestral liberation, a breaking of the psychic chain, a return to the soul. And for those who walk this path, the reward is not ease, but wholeness, the rarest and most powerful gift of all. The internal mother, the silent dictator within. Within the vast architecture of the unconscious, one psychic force reigns with eerie quietness and commanding power. The internal mother. She does not shout, but she governs. She does not strike, yet she shapes. Shi Heng Yi described this inner figure as the internalized mother imago, a psychic echo of the maternal presence embedded so deeply in the unconscious that it often evades the light of awareness for a lifetime. Even when the biological mother is long gone, through death, distance, or estrangement, the inner mother lives on, and not as memory alone, but as a living autonomous complex, silently scripting how we think, feel, choose, and relate. She becomes the invisible monarch of the inner kingdom, whispering into the soul of the adult what the child once absorbed without question. As you listen, I want you to consider, what decisions in your life have you made, not from your true desires, but from an unconscious desire to please or appease this internal mother? The recognition of her influence is the first step toward freedom. From our very first breath, the mother, or the one who stood in her place, became the mirror through which we glimpsed our first sense of self. Through her gaze, her tone, her embrace, or her withdrawal, we learned whether we were welcome in the world or merely tolerated. Shi Heng Yi believed these early impressions are not merely stored in the brain. They are mythologized in the soul, crystallized into what he called the mother complex. This psychic constellation becomes the mother imago, a symbolic image that carries emotional charge, meaning, and mythic weight. And here is the tragedy. The imago is rarely accurate. It is not the mother as she was, but the mother as we perceived her through a psyche still unformed, still desperate to survive. If the internal mother was nurturing, attuned, and consistent, she becomes an inner wellspring of self-worth and security. But if she was absent, rejecting, critical, or enmeshing, she becomes a silent saboteur, a force that, though unseen, conditions every relationship, every risk, every dream. Her voice may whisper, "You are too much, you are not enough, don't speak, don't shine, stay small, stay safe." Shi Heng Yi warned that when this voice is mistaken for the self, the individual becomes enslaved to a ghost, confusing inherited programming with inner truth. This is the birthplace of the inner saboteur, not mere insecurity, but the internalized criticism of a mother who once withheld approval or used affection as currency. The inner mother might appear in the psyche as an echo of disappointment, a command to abandon the self in favor of pleasing others, or a subtle panic whenever we dare to break away from inherited roles. Her voice arises during moments of expansion, like a hand pulling us back into the familiar prison of self-doubt. And when this internal figure is not made conscious, Shi Heng Yi explained, she is projected outward, onto lovers, teachers, bosses, friends. Suddenly, we are no longer seeing people for who they are, but through the emotionally charged lens of our unmet maternal longing. We expect them to heal wounds they did not cause. We react to them with disproportionate fear, neediness, or rage. We chase the fantasy of being chosen, nurtured, or validated, while unconsciously attracting partners who replicate the very emotional dynamics we are trying to escape. The negative mother, unintegrated, becomes a filter on reality, and the result is confusion, disillusionment, and emotional repetition. Take a moment to check in with yourself. Do certain people consistently trigger intense emotional reactions in you? Do you find yourself seeking approval from figures of authority? Do you often feel unseen or undervalued? These patterns may point to the internal mother's hidden influence.